Good afternoon, math peeps. This is Math 0028, Section 3.1, the U-Try problems. So here we go. Letter A, on this slide it says to identify the GCF, which is the greatest common factor. So when you're not actually factoring these, you're just finding the greatest common factor. So what you have to do, first of all, is look at the 15 and the 9, the coefficient, and find the biggest number that goes into both of those, which would be 3. And I don't have a pen yet. Okay, so the GCF for the coefficients would just be 3. Goes into both of those. Now, excuse me, with the variables, you want to make sure that first of all the variable is in all of the terms, and then if it's in all the terms, pick the variable with the smallest exponent. So here we have a to the fourth and a to the first. Well, a to the first is smaller, so we're just going to bring down a. And then look at the b's. It's in both terms, b squared and b to the fifth. B squared is the smallest, so that comes down as your greatest common factor. So your full answer for that is 3ab squared is the greatest common factor. Now look at letter B. Our coefficients are 4, 8, and 12. So the biggest number that will go into all of those would be 4. Now, some of you may say, well, what about 2? 2 does go into all of those, but it's not the greatest. So you want to find the largest coefficient, and what's weird is the largest coefficient, but you're going to find the smallest exponents, okay? So let me write that on here. The GCF is the largest coefficient factor, okay, the one that goes into all of those. Coefficient, that's a long word, factor. And with the variables, it's the smallest exponent. So that's how you can keep it straight. All right, so let's look at the variables here. We do have an a in all the terms. We have a squared, a cubed, and a to the first in that last term. So the smallest is a. And then there's a b in every term, b cubed, b squared, and b to the fourth. So b squared is the smallest, so that comes down into your common factor. So 4ab squared is the answer there. Now, on these, they're actually asking us to factor these. So what you're going to do is you're going to look for the GCF first and bring that out front, okay? So what goes into 5, 15, and 35 would be 5. So we bring that out front. Now, is an x in every term? No. So x cannot be a greatest common factor. So your only common factor there is just 5. So what you're doing is rewriting it as a multiplication problem. So you put a parentheses, and then you go back and you divide each term by your greatest common factor, okay? So 5x squared divided by 5, the 5's cancel, and you're just left with x squared. That comes down. Then you have minus 15 divided by 5 is 3, bring down the x, and then plus 35 divided by 5 is 7, and that's your answer. Now, you can check it by distributing the 5 back through the parentheses. If it doesn't give you exactly what you started with, then you're wrong, so you got to go back and check it, okay? Letter D. Here we have 20, 30, and 40. So what goes into all of those would be 10, okay? And then let's look at the x's. x4, it's in x every term. x4, x to the third, x squared. So the smallest is x squared. And then we have y in every term. The smallest there would be y to the third. So that's my greatest common factor that's out front. Now go back and put the common factor up underneath each term. It's so much easier if you put it under there so that you can see what it's going to cancel out to be instead of trying to do it all in your head. Write it out, okay? All right, so we go back to the first term. 20 divided by 10 is 2. And remember, when we divide with our exponents, we subtract them. So x to the fourth over x squared is just going to be x squared because you subtract. The y cubed over y cubed, those cancel. They're completely gone. So the first term ends up being 2x squared. Then you bring down your minus sign. 30 divided by 10 is 3. And then x cubed over x squared, subtract, that just gives you x. And y to the fourth over y to the third, 4 minus 3 just leaves y. Okay, so you don't want to write those little ones up there when you have your finished answer. So if it just ends up being an exponent of 1, just don't write it. Okay, then plus, for our last term, 40 divided by 10 is 4. The x squares, they cancel each other out. And if we subtract the y's, y to the fifth minus y to the third is y squared. And there's your answer. All right, let's see what's next. Okay, so letter E, here the first term is a negative. So this is where you need to, when you bring out your greatest common factor, you want to bring the negative sign with it. Okay, the only time you need to worry about that is if the very first term is negative. That's when you need to bring that negative factor out front. So the greatest common factor here, we don't have anything as far as the coefficients go because it's just 1, 3, and 1 is your coefficients. But your variables, x is in every term, and the smallest is x to the first. So since that first term is a negative, what I'm bringing out is a negative x. So be careful because your signs can really mess you up on this one. So if we go through and divide every term by negative x, on the first term, the two negatives are going to make that a positive. Subtract your exponents, 3 minus 1 leaves a positive x squared. Now on the second term, positive 3 divided by, technically remember that's a negative 1, that's going to be negative 3 because you're dividing, and then subtract the x's, that's just going to leave x, 2 minus 1. And on the last term, most people are like, oh, that's gone. No, it's not. A positive divided by a negative is a negative, so make sure you have the right sign. Now, here's where everybody messes up. X divided by x is 1, and you have to write that 1 there or your answer's wrong. Because first of all, if you have 3 terms in your original problem, you have to have 3 terms in the parentheses. Otherwise, when you distribute, you'll never get back to those 3 terms. So if a term, when you're dividing by your common factor, if it completely cancels out, it cancels out to 1. So remember that. Now, letter F. This one a lot of people get wrong. What you need to see, nothing goes into 5 and 7, so there's no common factor there except for 1. And if you divide by 1, it doesn't change anything. And you can't use any variables because the variables are all different in the two terms. So there's a couple different ways they could write your ask you to write the answer here. And I think in WebAssign they ask you to write out the word non-factorable. And if you spell it wrong, they mark you wrong, so be careful. Another way of writing this is we say it's prime, that you can't do anything with that. So it's in simplest form. It can't be simplified. Now, say for instance that this was just 2 terms with a comma in between and it said find the greatest common factor, then the answer would be 1. Because the greatest common factor is 1. But if it asks you to factor it, you can't do it because there's nothing to factor out there. And that should be it for the 3.1 U-Tries. Good luck.